Okay, we're gonna start. I hope our online speakers can hear us. And maybe they might also hear right now some Finnish disco in the pavilion next to us. If that's the case, that's just the mood here at one of the last days at COP. We are today gathering together to discuss AI for climate and specifically in the context of Ukraine green reconstruction. And for me, I'm going to be a moderator. My name is Darka Garняk. I'm the Director of Energy Security Marshal-Plan for Ukraine. And funny enough, it's a very funny panel for me to complete because before joining the energy industry in Ukraine, I have been working in the tech, just as every single Ukrainian out there. As soon as I turned 18, I started to be in there in software industry for gaming, specifically with Unity technologies. So it's kind of like bringing back to me some memories. And I would really want to see how we can today discuss AI, usage the AI for this. So with that in mind, I would like to say as a little status quo of how we right now can use the tech innovations and in the climate. So at the moment, as I said, when we were growing up, most of the workforce from Ukraine has been employed by the Western companies, anything from Google, Microsoft, and any other big and small companies. And this has been, of course, given a big influence on our development. So in 2018, Ukraine has been marked 102nd in e-governance in the world. And in 2024, it has been ranked the 5th. And it's, I think it's like 92 steps. We covered only like 6 years. And of course, we are competing even for more. But the reason we are not ranking even more because we can't vote specifically for our president or for our governments because of the war. So that's one of the big things that right now keeps us a little bit down in the rating. But this is a big development that has been happening in Ukraine. Secondly, we of course have been tracking the reconstruction efforts using the AI model. So all of the public investments at the moment are tracked through the DREAM system, where you can see the whole cycle of the public investments and see how they are good or not good, green or not green, corrupted, not corrupted. So it's very interesting development. And of course, coming back to the AI, right now Ukraine has adopted the national AI strategy. It's still in the drafting process, but this is something we're really looking forward to. And we are created the AI factory, which is the big national strategy and national adaptation of AI in the public infrastructure of Ukraine. So all of these things, we can see that Ukraine has been innovating. Just like it has been innovating in the military, the same, we believe it can innovate with tech in climate. So I can start with our first speaker. Because yes, of course, here we have one data scientist here from Ukraine. So in our realities right now, the hardest part at the moment is the collection of data, because most of the data is being either blown up or hard to gather or is in the mine territories. So if you could introduce yourself really quick and tell us how Ukraine can use the AI to combat these challenges. No.
Okay. First of all, well, thank you for inviting me to on this panel. It's a very great pleasure to be here with these prominent speakers and with you. So I work as a data scientist for an Italian company. I've been living in Italy for the last 20 plus years. And I mean, since the very beginning, since 2022, basically, when the full scale invasion happened, we have been also trying to think internally of, ways to help Ukraine and how, like, what potentially to do. And one thing that for sure is clear is that, as you already mentioned, that the Ukraine is innovating very fastly. It has a very dynamic and interesting internal like market sectors in terms of IT. It has been the case for the last at least 5-10 years, as far as I remember, but especially in the latest few years, because of the war, it actually got even more innovative because you have to find solutions to different problems. So we really are very interested in the dynamics that we can see developing in Ukraine, and hopefully, also with the topic of reconstruction and the post-war development, we will see even more of it, and this innovation could help and most probably will help also with transparency and making citizens more participant to the public life, to have more information, etc. So as a company, again, Sorintech, it's an Italian company. It's a consultancy, so we work in different sectors. And when you speak about lack of data, so that's the case for, I mean, all businesses have steps where they're missing data because of sometimes of mismanagement, sometimes because of known availability of those data, sometimes simply because they got lost, etc., or their structure changed over time. So that's something that has been, explored over the last few years in also normal businesses, not just in Ukraine. And we are, since a few years back now, we are developing in our data engineering strategies, internal ones. So we are developing ways to identify, first of all, eventual leakages or eventual data missings for our clients. So it's an important step when you do like data transformation. The very first step is to collect data, analyze it, and check how clean it is, what's missing, in order to be able to integrate it or find ways to fill the gaps. And then you can actually process it and gain information. So I think that on that side, there's still a lot to do. But this in Ukraine specifically, it has most surely to be coupled not just with traditional approaches, but also with data security and security issues, because again, there is a very specific context related to war. So you have to include like security considerations even more than what is done in like a normal business, maybe in Europe, etc., where we are seeing currently a higher level of threat. So we see that there are issues with security from the aggressor, because that has been happening to airports, to big businesses over the last few months and years. But in Ukraine, of course, this is at a completely different level. So in order to fill the gaps, you have to integrate both traditional ways of filling the missing parts and also security issues. We have a platform which is called IoT, and it's a proprietary platform that we have developed to collect sensor information and to create networks, for example, for energy systems, etc., in order to provide analytics. And one of the key points that we analyze when we are doing this is exactly, first of all, to understand whether some sensors or some parts are missing, so that we know, first of all, what we are lacking, and then eventually process the information. So this could be scaled, and hopefully we'll see synergies with Ukraine on this in the future.
While I have you here, can you provide you have been telling me before, some of the projects you are doing with the airports and so on, actually in Europe, using the AI. So can you provide some examples and maybe see how in the civilian life, in the normal life of Ukraine, we can apply them to Ukraine experience?
Yes, we have many projects. One of our recent most important clients is the airport, Bergamo Airport in next to Milan, and we have been developing some AI projects. So, for example, AI, it's not just chatbots. I mean, the panelists here know, but maybe the general audience, sometimes it's an information that gets a bit missed. AI, it's also, for example, can be applied to image processing and real-time pouring of information from really a different set of sources. So with the airport, we have, for example, we are developing an automatic way of allocating stand-in gates. So for passengers, best experience and faster experience at the airport, but also security. We have some security projects, for example, checking the perimeter of the airport in order to identify almost in real-time potential threats, etc. And this could be one of the interesting things also for Ukrainian very sensible infrastructure, for example, energy infrastructure, or buildings that are of national importance. And so you really have to be able to track the perimeter and get alerts, not when something has already happened, but when it's basically happening. We do this actually with very direct contact with the client, so it's also very customizable compared to other business solutions that are just take it or leave it. So the good part is that we have this very direct contact with them, and so can add custom rules and customizations to this business case. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now we from Ukraine gonna travel all the way to Estonia, to Tallinn. We have our online speaker, Ivo. Ivo, if you could really quickly introduce yourself and say us, since AI is becoming essential of how we analyzing the environmental data, what strategic approach should countries take to ensure AI is used responsibly? Ivo, back to you.
Yes, hello from Tallinn. I hope you have a nice and warm weather in Brazil and daytime. As you can see around me, it's quite dark at the moment. So I don't know if you can hear me. I do see people changing their headphones and so on. So I hope everything is still working. So I work for the Stockholm Environment Institute, specifically the Tallinn office of SEI. And for the past 2 years, we have been doing quite extensive work in Ukraine, specifically analyzing the current state of the green transition, as well as understanding what aspects in different key sectors need to be developed, need to change, and need to have a different approach in order for Ukraine to have a successful green transition, not only from the perspective of environmental goals, but also from the perspective of general quality of life. And once we are talking about the concept of rebuilding Ukraine, then how to rebuild the economy in a way that is the most resource efficient and most valuable possible. And within this context, we do see AI as an enabler. So in many cases, when we are talking about building up services, the speaker before me also kind of brought out a lot of these kind of data aspects that can be used. And when we are talking about the environment, there's a huge set of information and a huge set of data that needs to be both gathered, in which AI can help quite a bit. For example, the huge development in drone technology can be put together with developments in AI and data processing, and gather a lot more quite valuable environmental data. And kind of from that side, once you have the data, you can analyze it in much more in much more ways than we currently can with just human operators dealing with it. So there's definitely a lot of potentials, but kind of looking now at kind of the risks that may come from it. Is there a connection issue still working?
Yeah, only for a second. Just repeat the last sentence.
Okay. I was just getting to kind of the other side of the coin, so the risks of AI use in this sense. So from one side, we do have to kind of constantly keep in mind that using these huge data intensive processes comes with environmental costs themselves. In some cases, they might not be valuable to use, in a sense that the cost itself, the energy cost, the cost of water use, the cost on the climate, may be more than we are getting back in return from this. So this means that whatever developments we are doing in our AI systems have to take this efficiency side into consideration, that we don't take the first and most maybe energy expensive options that we can, but rather develop systems that are more inclined towards efficiency. And I do have to say, I've kind of looked into the draft of the AI strategy that Ukraine is currently developing. I haven't seen the full text, but what I have seen or what I have heard is generally quite positive. From one side, just the ambition of trying to be kind of among the top 3 countries implementing and developing AI by 2030, but also not only kind of utilizing these large global corporations and their technologies, which can come with another risk. So from one side, it is the risk of just wasting a lot of energy and causing more environmental damage, but they do come with risks of how do we ensure data validity, how do we ensure the analysis is actually as detailed and as valuable as possible. And we have seen, especially in these large language models that are most commonly used, that the information can be distorted from a security perspective. From one side, we do see it, but also we do have many actors internationally who might want to distort this information from an environmental and climate perspective. So having kind of this approach in the Ukrainian AI strategy of developing their own agents, if this is done in a very transparent way, in a responsible way, in a way that is open to the public to see what is going on behind the black box, so to say, I think this is a way to kind of mitigate the risks. But yeah, just to kind of bring the two sides together again, there is a lot of potential in using AI for the good of the environment, but we do have to take into account the actual impact itself can have, as well as the concerns of misusing AI for this analysis.
Thank you so much. You brought actually several really good points. I will stop on one for now, because Estonia is their leader in this sphere. I'm wondering what, in terms of the national strategy in AI for Estonia, like what issues, what challenges you right now have, what are how you combat the Russian influence in this sphere? Do you have anything to say about that?
Unfortunately, I can't consider myself as an expert in especially security topics in AI development. But I think one of the key value aspects or the key things that we do look at in the context of Estonia is really focusing on education. I think this is a huge part of the AI strategy in Ukraine as well, to make sure that competent and well-educated operators will be kind of part of this, because the human capital, the human talent behind this always needs to be quite strong. I think a lot of the problems come from just misunderstanding, misuse, and even just fully not comprehending what the machine behind it is doing. So if you actually get an impression that there is actual kind of human comparable thought going on, instead of just a lot of really complicated kind of calculations that are based on probability, then you might distort the data. So I think one of the most valuable things that we are currently doing is focusing quite heavily on how AI is taught in schools, how these systems are being used in the context of okay, so how do we actually understand them? For what can they be used? And I think once this is a basis, and I do think at least from the SCI perspective, from the environment perspective, this needs to be also put together with understanding the environmental side of these systems, then they can be used in a less risky manner.
Thank you so much. And now from Ivo, we're going to travel all the way to Australia with Tennant. Hello. Hello. You touched a little bit on energy efficiency, and I was wondering if you have something to say on the energy efficiency and the potential of that in AI.
Yes, absolutely. And so I very much agree with Ivo's points that we need strong attention to the energy and environmental and climate implications of the provision of AI services There is potential for the use of AI in all kinds of ways to make a contribution to energy system management and decarbonisation, but we do need that attention to the impacts of the AI services provision itself. And so that impact depends on a couple of things. But one of those is the extent of growth of underlying sustainable demand for AI services. And of course, there are many kinds of those services. And I think we've already on the panel talked about a range of specialized machine learning approaches to process data and optimize particular parts of business or the provision of public services or other dedicated purposes. There's also, though, the use of large language models and generative AI to provide, in principle, a very wide range of services. Now, there are debates raging about how large the ultimate commercially sustainable market for those large language model and generative AI services will be. There are some people who think it's all a bubble and it will pop soon. There's people who think that there's enormous commercial value there. But as of now, we don't know how big that underlying services demand is going to be. And markets are currently saying it's going to be very large because the market valuation of the firms most closely associated with that form of AI is very, very large in a way that could only be possibly justified if future earnings were going to be very, very big indeed. Markets sometimes form bubbles and get things wrong. We will see for any given level of that ultimate services demand, the next factor to determine the energy and environmental impact is the services efficiency of providing those services. And so currently, the dominant forms of generative AI that we are seeing, driven out of the part of the global tech sector that is centered on Silicon Valley and the United States, is very, very energy intensive. On some metrics, of course, we see a continuing and much talked about improvement in the efficiency of output. But the absolute energy requirements for individual data centers associated with training or running these models are getting larger and larger, and we're hitting gigawatt scale proposals for data center facilities. Now, I can talk a little later about Australia's experience in managing that kind of growth and some of the risks. But we should think about whether that level of energy intensity of service provision is actually going to remain the case. We have seen previous bursts of fear in the 1990s and in the 2000s that new waves of investment and service provision in information technology were going to lead to explosive growth in energy requirements. There were those fears around the dot-com boom. There were those fears around the growth of streaming services and of the cloud. And what we saw in practice was that the energy efficiency of IT service provision and data center operation improved so fast that total share of energy going to data centers has barely lifted until the last couple of years of intense AI growth, has barely lifted over the past couple of decades. And that's the product of 1,000 innovations and a focus by data center managers and their clients on continuous improvement in both the hardware and the management of those facilities. In generative AI, we saw at the start of this year a remarkable demonstration from DeepSeek in China of the potential for competitively performing by the standards of the long ago days of January, competitively performing models, but trained with, on the numbers that were released, about 1/43 of the energy input requirement to train that model. And why did that happen? Is it because of unique skills and capabilities? I'm sure very clever people were involved, but the context difference is probably the most important thing. Chinese firms operating under intense constraints on their access to some of the leading edge chips had to find ways to operate much more efficiently to provide a service at all within those constraints. In Silicon Valley, I think we see for the moment an endless flow of venture capital money and of debt that will fuel the most resource intensive version of providing these services. And if and when that flow reduces and there's a more normal attitude to risk and return from financiers, I think that engineers in Silicon Valley will find a lot of ways to get deeply more energy efficient than the services that they are providing today. Constraints create creativity. You're never less creative than when you have no constraints on you at and so just to get more speculative, if we think about the energy input requirements for the training of a human brain, they are a lot lower. You could argue about, how much attribution we should do of the energy input requirements of a person and the school system around them over 18 years to produce like a functional human brain, but it is not that many megawatt hours. And so the frontier of imaginable improvement in the provision of artificial intelligence services in terms of energy efficiency is a long way from where we are today. We should be able to do a very great deal better.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if we can right now jump all the way to the United States. Because Silicon Valley was mentioned, but also because there were some new January changes mentioned. And right now, a lot of development needs to happen on the level of states, on the level of cities, on the level of individuals. Could you please, Alex, speak, first of all, of course, introduce yourself, but also speak on how we can utilize AI on the subnational level?
Thank you, Darka. And this is actually really important because there are tangible areas where we can see a benefit to the community if the governments at the subnational level can implement it well. There's a lot of theoretical sides where the profit can come from the private sector, and about 40% of the US stock market is in essentially that perceived or not perceived bubble. Where they're actually investing in themselves. The chip makers and the AI companies invest between each other, which makes it even more concerning because it's almost a closed loop there, which is a 40% section of the US economy. Or maybe not. So what is the encouraging part can be if we can see where it can be tangibly used right now. And where it can actually help a democracy and connect to the people more is removing those bureaucratic barriers. And so whether it's getting your driver's license or filling out permitting for getting solar or anything like that, using AI to streamline that process, that technology exists today, and that's a very applicable use of it. That is actually not as data intensive. And just a quick note on the data side with the data centers, what's really important, because we have seen, as you mentioned before, the increase in efficiency, making sure the power generation used for that are dual use. So it's connected through what we call virtual power plants. It's connected for dual use into the existing utility in cities and towns, or frankly, rural areas where they could create more stability for the grid, where it's battery and the solar or battery and clean energy. If you do it just for the data center and it has no other purpose, you could be with a very large stranded asset. So the more we can diversify and ensure these energy usage are not just gas generators, right? That's what's literally happening right now. Megawatts, almost a gigawatt, actually, one with Elon Musk's one, worth of gas generation that's polluting the entire area and the town and steamrolling the local elected officials and the regulations there even, that's pretty much no other use can come out of that except for that one AI place. So being very strategic about zoning it correctly so that it can be multi-use and it integrated into the overall, finally, climate plans for the cities and regions and states. So if we look at some other more exciting aspects where a subnational can bring AI in, say we are working with sister city partners within Ukraine, UK, and US, and hopefully Australia soon and other places, right? And different policies get debated at the city council and the states and oblasts, but we don't always have a good idea what the result of implementing that policy is. And this is where AI can actually be quite exciting because we have the ability now to model where the effect of that policy could be, and we don't have to hire a McKinsey or a BC or someone else to do that for us, which is millions of dollars. The AI can make a pretty good assessment, and there's one that we're working with to pair with the sister city partnerships to say, hey, if this model goes forward or this policy goes forward, then here's a likely outcome. And one step beyond that can be, here are the financial modeling that comes from that. So where are the opportunities for financing and where would you need to get that financing, right? Here's the revenue stream that could come from it, or here's how much it would cost. That's a secondary aspect that would become very clear, and it better informs the policymakers so they can make more informed choices of where their city is going. Because say a city is thinking, okay, we're going to rebuild with a centralized gas thermal plant. Obviously, from a security standpoint, that's concerning because one missile could take it out, and it takes years or more to repair, depending on what they hit. But the modeling could look at, okay, let's look at that versus let's build with batteries and distributed solar. And how would you then distribute heat pumps among the town? Now, is that possible in a very dense city? That's less easy to do because thermal connected underneath is actually more efficient than individual heat pumps. But in a rural area, an individual heat pump connected with a solar and battery system might make the most sense, and the AI could model that out pretty effectively. And then we can see that data and we're like, okay, what's the financing mechanism for either choice? And then the other bit, based on the histories of the fluctuation in gas prices and the scarcity of it at times, that could be factored in and they could clearly see it. So these are models that exist today. And so we're excited to be able to work with that to better inform the lawmakers in the US, UK, Ukraine, and as we expand out to some of the other places, well, actually, we're chatting with Adelaide. Sorry, Australia. Next time. We'll keep working at it. So that when we do put policies in place, we're much better informed at the impacts it create by choosing clean energy that's distributed, frankly, is one of them. And then how can we finance it is the secondary part of it. So I do think that at the state and local level, there's tremendous excitement to be able to use AI in the correct way. I have other thoughts on the AI globally and how we need to integrate nature-based solutions into the modeling. Otherwise, it's never going to learn it itself. But that's probably a secondary question.
You can actually start on this one as well. But I also wanted to touch on something you told me last night about the UNCCC process. So there was a very interesting case of using the AI. And I would like to go around our panelists today and see what were the most creative usages of AI they have seen in their work that could be applicable to their countries or to Ukraine. So Alex, if you could share your experience to give like the kind of example of what we talked about.
So one of the exciting parts that the UNFCCC is implementing is how can we better use AI in the negotiations? And actually, they're working on a system where if we make a tweak to this portion of the negotiations, it can pretty much in real time spit out the data. Which for a lawmaker like myself, when I was elected in Maine, this would have been great because we'll put in and then we go wait hours for the printing office to print it, and then bring it back up, and we'd be playing frisbee at 1 a.m., chilling and then waiting, and like college folks, staying up all night to get the legislation through before the deadlines. This could speed up and make the process more efficient so people can see it and have more time effectively negotiating. Secondarily, would be even more exciting in many ways is, hey, say we decide to go this route, right? Take Article 6 and we take the strongest version of it with time and place. You don't need to understand Article 6 right now to do that, except to say that having the location of the power and the timing of it in a similar place to get the highest credits versus, hey, maybe I could take the credits halfway around the world and they still count, right? That's somewhat technical. But what an AI could do is model out the effect of that potentially and better inform the negotiators. Or in a bigger sense, right, with the forests. If we protect this many forests, this is the effect, right? Since we are in the jungle. And there's, by the way, there's some amazing AI work being done with some folks like Aaron Bergen, friends of mine, who are modeling out the effect of the forests and to be able to protect them, to put a value on the economic value of protecting the forests. So that's another thing AI has done decently well, is we inherently know we need to protect them for our health and their security and the planet's lungs. But some folks really want to see that dollar number, and they've been able to do that, to quantify it, so that we can create other financing mechanisms. So what the UNFCCC is working on is actually relatively exciting. We do it in the military too, to model other conflicts and other things. So let's bring it to the negotiations and make them more efficient to see the impacts of their decision making.
Thank you so much. Vladislav, I'm going to come back to you. Here's a microphone. So have you seen any interesting usages of AI, specifically in Ukraine, European context, and maybe, for instance, in combating the climate disaster? So, for instance, if you had some kind of AI model during the Kakhovka explosion in 2024, you know, like what would it make? What would difference it would make for us?
Yeah, I will probably take a small step back. So I think there are many great, very fancy, interesting projects where AI can be applied. At the same time, from a business perspective, there's very often the need to cut on the very repetitive and actually boring for people tasks. So when I go to work, I don't really want to stay there, compile like long, like bureaucratic forms and all of that. So one case is the one you were mentioning previously. So for example, compiling, files and whatever like that's needed for administration and etc. But also many businesses have that internally. So what I was mentioning previously, for example, at the airport, there are operators that need to compile like entire checklist of what has been done or hasn't been done. And actually, there is a high risk of not doing it right because the operator does that so frequently that they get distracted, or they simply, put the label on the wrong on the wrong checkbox and those kind of things. And AI, so it may seem boring. So I'm sorry that maybe I'm not bringing some super fancy projects in the room, but that's where you can actually get with a very small effort in terms of deploying the model and creating the project a very huge step ahead, because there's a lot of working hours that you don't need to spend on that, and actually the worker can be more creative or do other stuff and maybe even talk about more other projects, etc. So that's one. We have been internally, so I very much appreciate that this discussion about also the energy intensity of AI has been brought up, because internally it's been now around 6 months that we have a small team working on how to reduce, called Green AI, on how to reduce the emissions by AI. So we take we have developed a preliminary framework to evaluate on specific projects, so not at national scale in terms of the increase of electricity usage and all of that, but at a very small scale. So we are consultants, we have to work for the client, and we take a single project, we unpack it into, for example, the infrastructural needs, the inference against the training and all of that. So we divide among the different like parts of the project, and through a set of different also like coefficient and stuff, we can evaluate more or less detailedly the amount of emissions, for example, that's what we've been focusing on, of emissions from the project. And when we have a clear picture, not at a national level, that, you know, the US electricity usage is growing, but at that specific project level, where the emissions are coming from. Are they coming from, for example, from hardware, because it's not being used enough? Some clients, they have like proprietary data centers, and maybe just the hardware is being used 10% of the amount it could actually use. Those are a lot of embedded emissions that are not being considered. Or maybe you can tweak and work on the inference part. So to avoid, for example, repetitive queries that are useless. And the same for training. Do we really need to retrain the model again after just a few months, or is it good enough if we again change the inference? So there's a lot of this that can be done at a very small scale. You don't need to go, you know, of course we need the efficiency of the big, like AWS or Google, etc. data centers, but at the same time, we have a lot to do at a very small scale. And I think that especially, you know, again, I'm trying to refocus also on Ukraine here. When, you know, reconstruction has already started. We've been talking about Build Back Better and green reconstruction already for at least 3 years now. And when this thing will get even faster, you know, hopefully very soon in a post-war scenario, there will be a lot of requirements in terms of energy intensity, of resource intensity. So we need to be able to arrive prepared for that moment so that we can scale projects and actually make this Build Back Better also greener, so that it's not that energy intensive for a country that is, again, fifth in the world in terms of digital index. So most probably the IT sector and AI particularly will be at the very core of reconstruction and development. So we can't do a first reconstruction and then in a few years' time start discussing about pivoting and transitioning to a more sustainable or greener manner of doing the same things. We need to get it done correctly at the first try now. So this is the time to start thinking about this, to pilot this in specific projects, which again can be very fancy and interesting. So I've been following Article 6 for years, so I'd be happy to work on this kind of stuff. But at the same time, we have to do also the boring stuff and those projects. So sorry for being a bit long. Thank you.
No. Please be long. No. I was actually going to also make a comment about that, because I'm wondering, we were also making the estimate very recently on how much money do we need to reconstruct Ukraine. And at the moment, the number is from $189 billion. And just for you to understand, to like give this number into the perspective, it's like 3 times of Ukraine's pre-war GDP. Like, it's insane amount. So I'm also wondering if, like, with the usage of AI, with, you say, starting the small scale usage of it, we can decrease eventually this number to like something smaller, if there were, of course, it's going to finish sooner or later.
Well, for who has been in this process at UNFCCC for a few years, you must probably know that money is something very. I mean, you don't really know about how much you're talking about, and you don't really know what form do those money have. So I appreciate that there's been a lot of evaluations being done, because there will be also accountability towards the pressure that will be needed after the conclusion of the war. So it's very important to have these figures. At the same time, they are very huge and important, but where this money are coming from? So it won't be only from Ukrainians' budget. It will be also from partners, and it will be through partnerships. So it will be important for the Ukrainian business sector and also citizens, etc. So at all the levels, local administrations, to be able to create synergies in order to get this money. It's not about just giving them to Ukraine. It's about actually having like relationships between countries, between businesses that are that will grow into like economic development, etc. I don't know how far I'm worried about like getting this money. I think an important part will be that a lot of partners, not just countries, for example, European, US, etc., but also businesses will be willing to cooperate if there's a lot of transparency and clearance on where the money are being spent. We know that, you know, let's be clear, there is a corruption issue in Ukraine. There has been for years. There is a lot being done currently to lower this level. And it has been the case in previous decades, also in Europe. I live in Italy, and Italy didn't really, it has a lot of corruption now, let alone when Italy got the Marshall-Plan after World War II. It was basically, you know, at such high levels of corruption that you can't even imagine. And still, they got the money, and part of the country actually managed to develop. And now, you know, they are a G7 country. So, it worked, and it can work for Ukraine, but it will be important to get to work with this. It won't be easy. It will take time. Probably hard decisions will have to be made, but at the same time, it will be one way to de-risk investment and to facilitate capital inflow in Ukraine. So it's something that we can forget when we're dealing with reconstruction and like capital like flow to Ukraine. Yep.
Thank you so much. Ivo, back to you. Do you have anything to share to us on the interesting AI application for Ukraine or for the world in general that you have seen in your work? And of course, yes, continue.
I think I'm going to be at least a little bit boring, unfortunately, with this, although I would like to hear a little bit more on integrating nature-based solutions in these AI tools, because I think this would be a valuable part in what I'm about to say, because one of the things that we've seen when analyzing the challenges in developing kind of a more green approach in Ukraine, and this in no way is specific to Ukraine, it's just that in Ukraine, what we understand today, because of the Russian aggression, the challenge is much larger. And this is mostly spatial planning or land use in the most broader context. If you think about kind of all of the different goals that you have to start to achieve, so from one side, you know, developing a strong energy system and a strong energy network, and in the context of Ukraine and really everywhere, you would want to do it more decentralized, more renewable energy sources, meaning this has an impact on land use. You also have a large agricultural space that you want to keep developing and want to ensure that it stays strong. You have you know, forests that from one side would need to be reforested areas, but also you would need to make sure that enough forested areas remain for your LULUCF goals, so that you have a kind of a natural sink developing. You want to ensure that you have enough land kind of set aside, so to say, or well used for biodiversity protection, and on and on. So there's a huge amount of different things that need to be kind of considered when dealing with developing from a land use perspective. And in this context, it is a huge different set of both smaller and bigger tools that can aid in this. So I kind of I mentioned this already a little bit in the beginning, but from the perspective of, for example, just the huge development in drone use, you can combine that with very good remote sensing kind of systems that would allow you to get a much better understanding of both the land, its uses, and how changing these kind of things would affect the overall goals that you have. On another side, you can do, and this was already mentioned by previous panelists as well, kind of this policy coherence and general kind of strategic coherence analysis on a lot of the decisions that are made from the small scale of kind of, you know, planning, permitting, and spatial planning developments, and see how that fits into the broader picture. And then you can go to energy systems and develop energy systems in a way that is as efficient as possible, because you can bring in smart algorithms that allow you to decentralize systems and use more renewable energy in ways that previously, with kind of our older assumptions of you need to have huge amount of turbine power generation in a network to balance loads, it's just a different approach these days. So there's a whole set of different tools that can be brought into this kind of analysis that can be used from the perspective of as others mentioned, kind of from the small scale, but then to the big as well. It's more about kind of ensuring that these systems are well linked together. It's about ensuring that the data is gathered in an open and coherent way so that it can be interoperable in these systems. And it's also about creating trust within the system, because if it starts making bad decisions, then you get bad spatial planning. And then maybe I would like to hear a little bit more about how to ensure nature-based solutions are in there.
Alex, do you want to answer this one?
It's not the simplest thing to answer, but we did convene and host a number of impact investors, environmental groups, and family offices at the UK Parliament, particularly on this question. And so it was a wonderful event that brought a number of different perspectives together. And one unifying perspective in many ways is the realization that most of these generative learning algorithms and others do not actually have a way to think about how nature-based solutions can be a better solution than, say, carbon capture and sequestration. Because what is mostly out there on the internet in the discussions? It's the technical side where you're using tons of energy to capture a small amount of carbon. And frankly, a lot of carbon capture and sequestration, as we see in the United States, doesn't work. It's never dropped in price. So the challenge is when you're learning from everything that's out there, what's out there is disproportionately not scientifically shown to be the best way forward. And so you end up with situations where that's going to be more prominent. And actually, Russia's realized this too with their disinformation campaigns, where they're specifically flooding the internet with certain things so the AI systems pick it up and incorporate that into the results. So the current AI in ChatGPT is again, it's still human-based. It's basing it off of echoing us in many ways. And so as a result, we need to be deliberate about when the programming happens to include to say, hey, a nature-based solution, protecting nature is an important component to consider as part of it, right? So it's weighed a certain manner when we're making these algorithms. Because if we don't do that, it won't be present. And who knows what it'll do? Because actually, we only find out what it's learned until afterward, right? Which is the scary but also amazing part of AI, is that it's able to learn from itself, and it doesn't tell us until later. Maybe there's some smart people in dark rooms somewhere figuring it out, but ahead of time. But the current stuff is we need to be able to do the inputs ahead of time so that the protection of our planet is actually paramount, right? Otherwise, we get into the dark effects of like the Matrix, and we have been warned, right, by many a movie on this. Personally, I don't think that's how it will happen. I think what the bigger danger is autocratic governments using AI to control populations. And that's where you get the dystopian future versus the AI taking over from them, because AI is very top down, right? Command, execute. And that aligns really well with a Putin type government. And so if you're not putting in nature has a very democratic naturalization of how it works, right? Not one thing controls anything in nature. And so if you're bringing in nature-based solutions into it, it will only help the models move forward in a way that we can more beneficially learn from.
Thank you so much. And we're gonna come back finally to Tenant. Sorry for taking the microphone from you so many times. Anything you can share from like your experience in innovative AI usage? And of course, we will be needing to wrap it up very soon. So maybe if there is anything that you would like to share that you didn't have an opportunity to share yet, it would be great. It's the time.
Absolutely. So just on Alex's point about the potential analytical uses of AI in informing this process, informing negotiations, there are pluses and minuses to this. I think we have seen, for instance, in the debate in the United States that led to the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, a really unprecedented level of almost real-time deep analysis of the energy system and climate impacts of different iterations of text that were being considered and negotiated within the US Congress. And that was largely extremely positive. It meant that legislators and stakeholders were better informed than they had ever been during equivalent debates. However, I am a policy person. I'm not an engineer. I've spent a lot of time around debates that are informed and sometimes misinformed by economic modeling and energy systems modeling. And the results of those analytical exercises are only as strong as the tools themselves. And there are some things that the economic models and energy system models that we use don't deal with very well. But all of the asterisks and qualifiers and nuances on those exercises tend to get lost the instant that those exercises hit the legislature or the public debate. And so we need to keep those limitations very, very firmly in mind. There will be limitations to the analyses that different forms of generative AI and machine learning are able to provide. They will open new frontiers. They will have limitations. And so we just need to remember. And in terms of the real world consequences that mistaking the nature of the output of a process can have, in my country, 6 years ago, we had a major debate among energy nerds about how to divide up the costs of new transmission interconnections between our regions, our states. And the economic analysis that was available at that time suggested that the method of dividing those costs that was intuitively the fairest, which is that you allocate the costs to those who benefit in proportion to the benefit, rather than just going 50-50 between the direct states where the connection is made, because there are impacts up and down the energy system. But there was analysis available that said, well, one state that in Australia, Queensland, was thought to be paying much more under the new approach than they would under a strict definition. So they just didn't support it because they thought they knew how it would play out and it wouldn't benefit them. So no. And then a couple of years later, they changed their policy on decarbonisation to embrace decarbonisation. And a reasonable analysis would then have shown that actually getting more interconnection would have benefited them quite a lot. But they'd already killed the reform process because they thought they knew how it would play out. Sometimes having less information or recognising that we don't know how things are going to play out can make us more willing to embrace a more abstractly fair approach where if we didn't know which position we would be in, we would say, well, that's a fair approach. Knowledge sometimes can get us stuck. And my very final thought, sorry, is that to protect energy users during the and climate goals during this potentially extremely large expansion of data center capacity. In my country, we may be going from 4 terawatt hours per annum of data center energy consumption to our market operator thinks 36 terawatt hours per annum over 20 years. The customer councils for electricity than the
She was on the other panel and she was able to run very quickly to here and and say a few words today and join our first ever at the Ukraine Pavilion. So please, Anjali, if you could really quickly introduce yourself and also answer the question of using the data monitoring and using the environmental data from the UK experience and from your personal experience to restore the forest.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, and apologies for being late. I was just on chairing a panel over in the UK Pavilion on nature security and how important it is to all the systems that we rely on. So my name is Anjali Goswami. I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor for the UK's Department of Environment, Food and in my free time, I'm a biodiversity scientist at the Natural History Museum in London, where my research is about species interactions and how climate change and large-scale environmental change influence how species have evolved through deep time. So in terms of how new tech and new opportunities for monitoring, even remotely in areas that are inaccessible, on that topic, I think there is immense opportunity, and we know that this field is moving very quickly. And some of the key technologies that we have been investing in very heavily in the UK and DEFRA in particular include Earth observation and eDNA. And these are both approaches that obviously can capture information where you're not able to directly go into a place by obviously using satellite imagery. Now, those kinds of approaches generate vast amounts of data, but using new AI approaches, you can actually train models that can identify different habitats, can actually more effectively and more quickly monitor changes in habitats, and also look at things like recovery. And the resolution of these approaches is hugely increasing. I'm sorry, there's a fire.
I think there is a fire, yes.
Okay.
Okay, Ivo, I think we have a fire and we need to turn it off, okay? So we're going to see.
I hope you get out well.